Once upon a time there was a very old king who fell ill. Knowing that he was going to die, he called the faithful one, who was the one he loved the most of his servants, and they called him that because he had been faithful to his master all his life. As soon as he arrived, the king told him, "My faithful one, I know that my end is near, only the fate of my son has me carefully, is still very young, and will not always know how to manage well. I will not die peacefully if you do not promise to watch over me. For him, teach him everything he should know, and be a second father to him." "I promise you," replied Juan, "not to abandon him, and to serve him loyally, even if it costs me my life." "Then I can die in peace now," said the old king. "After my death you will teach him all the palace, all the proximities, the rooms, the subterraneans with the riches in them enclosed, but do not let him enter the last chamber of the large gallery, where is the portrait of the princess of the Golden Dome, because if you see this painting, you will experience such an incredible love for it that it will make you expose yourself to the greatest dangers. Try to get him out of this." Faithful John repeated his promises, and the old king calmly leaned his head on the pillow and breathed his last. As soon as the old king was laid in the tomb, John told his young successor what he had promised his father on his deathbed. "I am ready to fulfill it," he added, "and I will be faithful to you as I have been to your father, even if I cost life." As soon as the time of mourning had passed, John said to the king, "Now you can know your inheritance. I will show you your father's palace." He took him all over him, above and below, and showed him all the riches that filled the magnificent rooms, omitting only the room in which was the dangerous portrait. Had been placed in such a way that, as soon as the door was opened, he was seen at once, and he was so well fact that it seemed to live and breathe, and that nothing in the world was so beautiful or so kind. The young man. The king immediately saw that faithful John always passed this door without opening it, and he asked him the reason. "It is," replied the other, "because there is something in the room that will frighten you." "I've already seen the whole palace," said the king, "I want to know what's here." And he wanted to open by force. Faithful John restrained him by saying, "I have promised your father, on his deathbed, not to let you into this room, of what could result for you and me. The greatest misfortune," replied the king, "is that my curiosity is not satisfied. I will not rest until that my eyes have seen everything. I'm not leaving here until you've opened me up." The faithful one, seeing that there was no way to refuse, went to look for the key, full of sadness in his heart and sighing a lot. As soon as he opened the door, he went in first, trying to hide the portrait with her body. Everything was useless. The king, rising on the tip of his feet, saw him through above his shoulders. But seeing that image of such a beautiful and dazzling young woman, gold and precious stones, fell unconscious on the ground. The faithful John lifted him up and took him to his bed. "The damage is done. My God, what will become of us?" And he made him drink a little wine to restore his strength. The king's first word, when he came to, was to ask whose beautiful portrait it was. "That of the princess of the Golden Dome," replied faithful Juan. "The love that has made me conceive is so great," said the king, that if all the leaves on the trees were languages, they would not suffice to explain it. My life depends in the future on your possession. Me. You will help, you who are my faithful servant. Faithful John pondered for a long time how he should manage, since it was very difficult, appearing before the eyes of the princess. Finally, he imagined a medium, and said to the king, "Everything that surrounds the princess is gold, chairs, cups, goblets and furniture of all kinds. You have 5 tons of gold in your treasury, one must be given to the silversmiths to make glasses and gold jewelry of all shapes, birds, beasts, monsters of 1,000 shapes, in short, everything that should please the princess. We will set out with these jewels and try our luck." The king sent for all the silversmiths in the country, and they worked night and day until everything was ready. Concluded. So they put him on a ship. John the Faithful took the merchant's suit and the king. He did the same so that no one could know him. Then they set sail and sailed to the city where the princess of the Golden Dome lived. Faithful John disembarked alone and left the king in the ship. "Perhaps," he said, "I will bring the princess with me, make sure that everything is in order, that they are at the dress 2 gold vessels and that the ship is decorated as for a party." Immediately he filled his belt with many gold jewels and went straight to the king's palace. As soon as he entered, he saw in the courtyard a young woman drawing water from a fountain with 2 golden buckets. As he turned to leave, he saw the foreigner and asked him who he was. "I am a merchant," he replied. And opening his belt, he showed him his wares. "What beautiful things!" he exclaimed. And putting his buckets on the ground, he began to look at all the jewels, one after another. "It is necessary," he said, "that the princess see all this. She will buy it for you, because she likes the gold objects." And taking him by the hand, he led him up to the palace, because she was a maiden. The princess liked the diamonds so much that she said to Juan, "It is so well worked, that I buy everything from you." But this one answered him, "I am only the servant of a very rich merchant, everything you see here is nothing in comparison of what my master has in his ship. In it you will see the most precious and beautiful works. Gold." He wanted them to be brought to him, but one said to the princess, "There are many, it would take a lot of time and a lot of space, your palace would not be enough." Aroused by this, and he finally exclaimed, "Well then, take me to that ship, I want to see your master's treasures myself." The faithful one accompanied her very happily to the ship, and when the king saw her, she seemed even more beautiful than his portrait. Her heart leapt with joy. When he came on board, the king offered him his hand. At this time the faithful Juan, who had remained behind, ordered the captain to raise the anchor and set off. Under full sail the king went down with her to the chamber and showed her, one by one, all the pieces of tableware of gold, the plates, the cups and the birds, the beasts and the monsters. Passed so many hours and while she was busy examining everything, she did not know that the ship was sailing. When he had finished, he thanked the alleged merchant and prepared to return to his palace, but arriving at the bridge, he saw that he was in the high seas, very far from land, and the ship was sailing. "I've been sold," she exclaimed in horror. I was robbed. Fall into the hands of a merchant. I would rather die. But the king, presenting his hand to him, said, I am not a merchant, I am a king, and of as good a family as yours. If I have robbed you with cunning, do not attribute it to more than the violence of my love. It is so big, that when I have seen your portrait for the first time, I have fallen unconscious to the ground. These words comforted the princess, her heart was touched, and she consented to marry the king. While they were sailing on the high seas, faithful John, sitting one day in the stern of the ship, distinguished in the air 3 crows that came to stand before him. He heard what they were saying to each other, well understood their language. So you're taking the princess from the Golden Dome already? Said the first. Yes, replied the second, but it is not yours yet. What? Said the third, isn't she sitting next to him? Does matters? Replied the first dash, when they disembark they will present the king with a chestnut horse. He will want to ride you, but if he does, the horse will be thrown into the air with him and they will never have any more news from you. But can that be avoided? Said the second. Yes, answered the first, as long as another person jumps on the horse, and taking one of the pistols he carries in the chair left him dead on the spot. So the king will be freed. But who can know this? In addition to the fact that whoever knows it and says it will be turned into stone from foot to foot. The knees. The second crow said in turn. I know something more still, even assuming the horse dies, the young king will not for that reason possess to his fiancée. When they enter the palace together, they will present him to the king on a platter with a magnificent wedding shirt that will appear to be woven of gold and silver, but is in reality nothing more than of pitch and brimstone. If the king puts it on he will be burned to the marrow of his bones. Is there no resource to avoid it? Said the third. There is one, replied the second. It is necessary that a person, equipped with gloves, take the shirt and put it on the fire. Burnt the shirt will save the king. But what use is this, if the one who knows it and say it will turn to stone from knee to heart? The third crow added. I know something more still, even if the shirt is burned, the king will not possess his betrothed. If there is a dance at the wedding and the queen dances in it, she will suddenly faint and fall as if dead, and it will really remain if there is not someone to pick it up immediately and suck 3 drops of blood that they will come out on his right shoulder, which he will spit out immediately. But whoever knows and says it will be turned to stone from head to toe. After this conversation the crows flew. Faithful John, who had heard them, began since then to become sad and silent. To be silent was to expose the king to a misfortune, but to speak, it was seeking his own downfall. At last it was said, I will save my lord, even if it costs me my life. Upon disembarking, everything the crow had said happened. They presented the king with a magnificent horse. Sorrow _ I am going to ride in it, he said, to go to the palace. And he was about to put his foot in the stirrup, when, passing in front of him, faithful John jumped on top of it, pulled the pistol from the saddle and held out the dead horse. The other servants of the king, who did not love faithful John very much, said that one must be mad to kill such a beautiful animal and that the king was going to ride. But the king said to them, "Shut up, and let him work, his loyalty is foolproof, and he will have had his reasons for doing so." They arrived at the palace, and in the first room they found the wedding shirt placed in a tray, which it seemed to be gold and silver. The prince was going to touch it, but the faithful one deflected him, and seizing it with gloves, he threw it into the fire, which her in the same instant. The other servants began to murmur. "What audacity!" they said. "He has burned the king's wedding shirt." But the young king still insisted. "No doubt he has his reasons, let him work, because his loyalty is foolproof." The weddings were celebrated. There was a great dance, and the bride began to dance. From that moment, faithful John did not lose sight of her. Suddenly she felt like weakness, and fell dead on the ground. He threw himself on her immediately, picked her up and took her to her room, and there, throwing her on the bed, he leaned over her and sucked 3 drops of blood from her right shoulder, which he promptly spat out. In the same instant he breathed again and regained consciousness, but the young king who had seen him everything and that he did not understand Juan's behavior, he ended up becoming uncomfortable and ordered him to be arrested. John the Faithful was sentenced to death the following day and led to the scaffold. Being uploaded already in the latter, said thus: "Every man who is going to die can speak before his end. Am I given permission to do so?" "I grant you," said the king. Then he related how he had heard the conversation of the crows in the sea, and how everything that he had done was necessary to save his master. "Oh, my faithful John!" exclaimed the king, "I forgive you, make him come down." But at the last word that John the Faithful had uttered, he fell lifeless, turned into stone. The queen and the king were very sorry. "Oh," said the king, "so much self-sacrifice has been very poorly rewarded." He had the stone statue brought to his bedroom, near his bed, and whenever he saw it, he repeated, crying, "Ah, my faithful one, who could return your life?" After some time, the queen gave birth to twin sons who she raised happily and who were the happiness of their parents. One day when the queen was in church, and the 2 children played in the room with their father, they directed their eyes to the statue and he could not stop repeating, still sighing, "Oh, my faithful one, why can't I save your life?" But the statue, taking the floor, said to him, "You can if you want, sacrificing what you have most dear." "All that I have in the world," exclaimed the king, "I will sacrifice for you." "Well then," said the statue, "in order for him to come back to life, you have to cut off the heads of your 2 sons and rub me from top to bottom with his blood." The king turned pale upon hearing this terrible condition, but thinking of the self-sacrifice of this faithful servant, who had given his life for him, drew his sword and with his own hand cut off the heads of his children and he rubbed the stone with his blood. The statue revived at the same moment, and John the Faithful appeared before him alive and well. But then he said to the king, "Every sacrifice for me will have its reward." And taking the heads of the children, he placed them on his shoulders and rubbed their wounds with their blood. At the same moment they came to life and began to jump and play, as if there were no happened. The king was overjoyed. When he found out that the queen had returned, he made Juan and his children in a large closet. As soon as he entered, he asked, "Have you prayed in church?" "Yes," he answered, "I have constantly thought of faithful Juan, so unfortunate because of us." "Dear woman," he told her, "we can restore your life, but it will cost us that of our children." The queen turned pale, and her heart sank. He replied, however, "We owe him that sacrifice because of his self-sacrifice." The king, pleased to see that she had thought like him, went to open the closet, and made faithful John come out and to the two children. "Thank God," he added, "we have saved him and we have our children." And he told the queen what had happened, and they all lived together for many years.